The wind swept across the marble plaza in hushed waves, carrying with it the faint echo of distant bugles. The crowd had gathered in a loose half-circle, shoes clicking softly against stone, cameras held low in trembling hands. At the heart of the open expanse stood a lone tomb guard, rigid, flawless, an unblinking pillar of discipline carved against the sky. His gleaming rifle rested along his shoulder, his white gloves were motionless as bone. Even the air around him seemed afraid to stir. For minutes, he had not twitched, not blinked, not breathed in any visible way, as if time itself refused to touch him. Then, from the far edge of the plaza, came the soft tap, tap, tap of a cane. The sound was small but carried like thunder. Every head turned. An elderly man approached slowly, spine bent with years, his frame wrapped in a dark blue blazer heavy with metals. They clinked with each step, tiny echoes of distant gunfire. Upon his chest gleamed one medal unlike the others, a five-pointed star of pale gold on a sky-blue ribbon. The Medal of Honor, gasps rippled through the crowd. The old man's steps faltered halfway across the plaza. His cane slipped. A stranger caught his arm gently, steadying him. He nodded, whispered thanks, and continued each step, trembling but determined. His eyes, pale and clouded, locked onto the guard ahead as if drawn by some invisible thread. And then came the voice that shattered the hush. "Look at that." A man near the ropes scoffed, loud enough for all to hear. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with expensive sunglasses and the careless swagger of someone used to being listened to. All this ceremony for a fossil from a forgotten war. What's he even guarding air? A murmur of disapproval rippled. Some looked away, others stared in disbelief. The Medal of Honor veteran did not react. He simply kept walking. The guard did not flinch, did not shift, did not blink. "Bet that statue boy won't even move for him," the man sneered. "Protocol over respect. That's your military." The words hung in the air like poison. The veteran drew closer. The guard's gaze remained locked forward. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed on. Then, in one motion, swift as lightning, the guard broke. "Protocol." He pivoted on his heel with mechanical precision, rifle slicing the air, and raised a crisp, flawless salute aimed directly at the frail old hero. The crowd gasped. The mocking man froze, and in that silent heartbeat, the world witnessed what honor truly means. The guard's passed his name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole, though few would ever hear it. Tomb guards rarely have names to the public. They are shadows, silent sentinels bound by a code older than most living memory. Before the immaculate uniform and wordless steps, Daniel had worn desert camo crusted in dust and blood. He had been a squad leader with the 101st Airborne in Kandahar. He had known the taste of fear in his mouth, the way it dried your tongue like sand, the way your heartbeat could drown out gunfire. He had also known laughter, especially from Corporal Mason Briggs. His closest friend since basic training, Mason was the loud one, the fearless one, the one who could make a whole platoon forget they were in hell for 5 seconds by cracking a joke through cracked lips. Then came the convoy, ambush. The memory still woke Daniel most nights. The flash, the roar, the rolling metal. Mason's voice swallowed mid. Daniel had crawled through shattered glass and fire, dragged 3 men out. But not Mason. Never Mason. Afterward, they pinned a medal on Daniel's chest. He left it in a drawer and never touched it again. The world called him a hero. He felt like a ghost. When he came home, he found himself standing for hours in cemeteries, tracing names carved in stone as if searching for his own. Until one day, at Arlington, he stood before the tomb of the unknown soldier and watched a guard glide across the mat, perfect, silent, eternal. That stillness struck him harder than any explosion ever had. It was peace, it was duty without ego, it was a promise. They will never be forgotten, and so Daniel joined. The training nearly broke him. Months of drills until muscles screamed, hours of practicing turns until his feet bled, days memorizing the histories of every war and every unknown soldier. He shaved to glass every morning, pressed his uniform with microscopic precision, and learned to hold still in 110-degree heat until his mind drifted into blank white space. Silence became his sanctuary, stillness became his shield. And now, on this autumn afternoon, that shield had been pierced, not by the veteran who earned his salute, but by the man who mocked it. The antagonist, enters Victor Harlow, was his name, and he was everything Daniel wasn't. A firebrand politician with perfect hair, an endless grin, and an instinct for cameras like a shark scents blood. He had clawed his way up the public ladder by attacking anything old-fashioned, especially that military's costly pageantry. In televised debates, he sneered at taxpayer-funded toy soldiers marching around marble for tourists. He called the tomb God an outdated relic for a country clinging to ghosts. And today, he had chosen Arlington as his stage. Reporters whispered that his team had choreographed the whole scene, the press van arriving at the same moment as Harlow, polished black SUV, the photographers conveniently stationed near the plaza ropes, the carefully leaked rumor that he might announce a build-to-ceremonial budgets. But what no one had planned was the arrival of the Medal of Honor veteran that had been fate's doing, and fate, Daniel thought, had an unbreakable sense of timing. Weight of the place Arlington was not just a cemetery, was soil woven with sacrifice, row after row of bone-white markers standing, like silent witnesses to every war America had ever bled through. The air itself seemed to hum with memory. At the plaza center lay the tomb of the unknown soldier, guarded every second of every day since 1937. Rain, snow, hurricanes, none of it had ever stopped the watch. Every guard who took the oath knew the rules: never speak while on duty, never break formation, never react to the crowd. Even flinching at a sudden noise was a mark of shame. Breaking protocol in public could mean being removed from the guard entirely, a dishonor so great most would rather collapse from heatstroke than move an inch out of line. Yet Daniel had moved, not to defend himself, not to fight, but to honor. And now, as the stunned silence lingered, the meaning of that place pressed down on everyone watching. Parents who moments ago were checking their phones were now holding their children close, whispering about what they had just seen. Elderly veterans stood straighter, eyes glistening. Even the leaves seemed to hang motionless in the air. Only Harlow broke the spell. He stepped forward, clapping slowly with a smirk that sliced through the reverence. The flash of his watch caught the sun like a blade. Cameras shifted toward him just as he wanted. "This," he said to no one and everyone, "is exactly what I mean. Rule-breaking dressed up as virtue. Drama over discipline." He let the words roll off his tongue like poison. Some in the crowd frowned. Others turned their faces away. The Medal of Honor veteran simply lowered his eyes. Daniel did not move. He could feel his heart hammering somewhere, deep behind the fortress of his stillness. But his face stayed stone, his hands locked behind his rifle. The silence of his oath wrapped around him like armor. But he also felt something else, something dangerous. A ripple in the crowd, a low building anger, veterans' jaws tightening, a mother covering her child's ears, camera lenses glinting like predator eyes. Harlow saw it too, and mistook it for attention. He stepped closer, boots striking the marble like drumbeat, eyes glittering. Daniel did not break stance, yet somewhere behind that immovable mask, he felt Mason's voice again, laughing like he used to in the desert. "Hold the line, brother. Just hold the line." And with that, the pieces were set. The stage was ready. Honor and arrogance were about to collide, and Arlington itself would remember the sound. The sound of Victor Harlow's boots on the marble rang louder than it should have. Sharp, echoing, invasive. Each step seemed to splinter the silence Daniel had built around himself, the silence the guard platoon had built around the tomb for generations. Harlow thrived on noise, and he knew exactly how to make it. Poison wrapped in applause, he stopped a few paces from the plaza ropes, hands clasped behind his back in a parody of military posture. Cameras pivoted toward him like sunflowers. A few of his aides slipped through the crowd, quietly signaling angles to photographers. "That was dramatic," Harlow said, nodding at Daniel's salute to the veteran who still stood off to the side, cane trembling. "Very theatrical. You're not supposed to do that, are you? Break formation. Break the sacred rules." A flicker of movement ran through the crowd, not from Daniel, but from the bystanders. Eyebrows tightened, breaths shortened. Daniel did not move. He stared ahead, gaze locked through the invisible corridor of duty that stretched before him. Harlow smiled wider, sensing the tension. He fed on it like oxygen. "I mean, if rules can just be tossed aside when someone feels like it," Harlow went on, "why have them at all? Why spend millions of dollars a year on pageantry, on marble squares and toy rifles and plastic discipline?" Gasps and murmurs rose. The word plastic hung like acid. An older man in a faded marine cap muttered, "Watch your mouth." But Harlow either didn't hear or didn't care. He raised his voice, projecting for the cameras. "Honor isn't standing like a statue for tourists. It's solving real problems. Feeding hungry kids, fixing roads. He waved a hand toward the tomb. "This is cosplay." A little girl clutched her father's hand tighter. The father's jaw flexed. Daniel's white-gloved fingers did not twitch. The crowd, shifts the air around the plaza began to feel heavier. The respectful hush had turned brittle. Sharp-edged. Veterans in the crowd shifted their stance unconsciously, not aggressive yet, but watchful, coiled, Several were filming on their phones now, the cold light of screens glowing on hardened faces. Reporters glanced at each other, silently debating whether this was still theater or becoming something else entirely. Through it all, Daniel stood motionless, the sun glinting off the brass buttons of his dress coat. Sweat traced down his spine beneath the fabric, but his face remained carved in stone. Stillness is strength, he reminded himself. You are the wall between chaos and the tomb. Nothing crosses you. Harlow closes in, but Harlow wasn't finished. He sensed resistance, and to men like him, resistance was simply another kind of spotlight. He ducked under the thin rope barrier, an act that drew an audible snap of warning from a security officer, though too softly to stop him. Cameras surged forward. Harlow walked directly toward Daniel. You know, he said conversationally, voice carrying unnaturally well, I almost enlisted once. My father wouldn't let me, said there was no point in wasting talent on ceremony. He circled to Daniel's left flank, speaking as if to the press but always keeping his gaze angled toward the silent guard. And looking at this, maybe he was right. The Medal of Honor veteran, now seated on a bench nearby, slowly shook his head. His hand trembled on his cane, knuckles white. Daniel's heart drummed. His mind pulled inward, deeper into the tunnel of his training. Left foot locked at a rifle aligned to shoulder angle, chin high, eyes forward, breathing shallow, pulse irrelevant. Harlow stopped directly in front of him now. So close, Daniel could smell the expensive cologne under the temps of camera flash residue. This is the problem with your kind, Harlow whispered, just loud enough for microphones to catch. You worship ghosts. You stand in the sun for bones that don't even have names. The words hit harder than a punch. Daniel's jaw ached from the pressure of holding still. A child in the crowd whispered, why is he being mean? No one answered that. The thin line. Harlow leaned in slightly, voice dropping to something colder. Do you even know who's in there? He said, nodding toward the white marble sarcophagus behind Daniel. You don't, no one does. You're saluting emptiness, pretending it matters. A tremor rippled through the crowd like a shiver through grass. A reporter's camera slipped from his fingers and clattered against the stone. Daniel's mind drifted. Unbidden to Mason. Mason laughing under desert sun. Mason's boots kicking up dust. Mason's face gone in an instant of fire. He knew what was in that tomb. Everyone knew. Not names. Not faces. Sacrifice. And sacrifice was never empty. He anchored himself in that truth, pressing it into his bones until the urge to speak dissolved into silence again. His stillness grew heavier, denser, like a mountain settling. The crowd reacts. Harlow straightened and turned to the press, grinning like a showman finishing a trick. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, here you have it, the face of hollow tradition. A man so trained to obey he can't even defend himself from words, but tore it. Veterans bristled visibly. One woman in an Air Force jacket shouted, you don't deserve to stand here. Applause cracked from the opposite side of the plaza. Others hissed. The sound fractured. Cheers, boos, shouts all swirling around the one man who did not move at all. Harlow thrived in chaos. He smiled broader, spreading his arms as if conducting an orchestra. Yes, he said, voice booming. React, my friends. Defend your marble dollhouse. Cameras flashed like lightning. And then, almost theatrically, Harlow spun and pointed at Daniel. Move, he said. Daniel didn't blink. Come on, Harlow taunted. Say something, anything. Prove there's a man inside that costume. Silence. Harlow stepped closer, boots scraping. His shadow merged with Daniel's polished shoes. Or are you just? Harlow paused, letting the insult drip like venom, a wind-up toy with delusions of meaning. Cracks and restraints inside Daniel. Something cracked. Not visibly. Not even audibly, but a tremor passed through the deep layers of self-control he had spent years building like armor plate over a broken core. He could feel every pair of eyes in the plaza boring into him. The Medal of Honor veteran's sorrowful gaze. The veteran's coiled fury. The children's wide-eyed confusion. He could feel Mason's ghost too, hovering just behind his shoulder. Hold the line, brother. Just hold the line. Daniel's fingers clenched tighter behind his rifle until his knuckles blanched. His breath slowed. Stillness. Always stillness. Harlow pushes further. Harlow noticed nothing, or mistook Daniel's silence for weakness. He grinned, shark-like, and paced around to Daniel's right side. You know what I see, he said, voice dropping again. I see fear, not discipline. Fear you're afraid to break your little rules. Because if you do, the illusion vanishes, and everyone sees what you really are. Harlow stopped, leaned close, and whispered, nothing. The word hung in the air like frost. Gasps rippled. The little girl began to cry quietly into her father's sleeve. The Medal of Honor veteran closed his eyes, lips moving in some private prayer. Daniel's stillness became unbearable in its weight. Like watching a storm trapped inside glass. The boiling point. Harlow straightened, satisfied, and turned to stride theatrically back toward the crowd. But then, something in him faltered. The energy he fed on wasn't applause anymore. It was hostility. Faces glared. Phones filmed. Every eye was cold steel. Harlow hesitated, just long enough for everyone to see it. Then he recovered, flashing another grin, as if he still owned the scene. "Remember this moment," he said, spreading his arms. "This is what blind tradition looks like." And with that, he gave Daniel a mock salute, sloppy, careless, dripping contempt. Daniel didn't move, but behind the mask of discipline, a storm gathered, not of rage, not even pride, of something older, something forged in deserts and loss, something sacred. Harlow had not just mocked a guard, he had mocked the unknown, and the line between provocation and violation was about to be crossed. The plaza had gone deathly still. Even the wind seemed to pause, as though the air itself refused to move until anything broke the tension. Victor Harlow stood just a few paces away from Daniel, basking in the spectacle he had built. He thought he had one, thought the silence was submission. It wasn't. Inside Daniel, the silence was coiling tight like a drawn bowstring. The final taunt. Harlow turned his back theatrically to Daniel and faced the sea of cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "there stands a man too afraid to speak, too bound by chains of obsolete ritual to think for himself." Boos rippled through the crowd, tangled with nervous laughter and angry shouts. Veterans folded their arms like loaded rifles. The Medal of Honor recipients sat stone still, gaze locked on Daniel as if silently pleading. Harlow sensed the chaos and wanted more. He whirled back to Daniel, striding right up to the invisible boundary line, the one every visitor knew never to cross, the one no one crossed and left unchanged. "Let's see what it takes to make the statue flinch," Harlow muttered, mostly to himself. Then, before anyone could react, he reached out and tapped Daniel's shoulder. It was nothing, the barest touch of fingertips, but it detonated like thunder. Gasps ripped through the crowd. A child screamed. The security officer's hand flew to his radio. "Touching the tomb guard on duty is unheard of. It is the one inviolate rule, as sacred as the tomb itself." And Harlow had just shattered it. Time slows. Daniel's body reacted before his conscious mind caught up. Years of training surged forward like floodwater breaking a dam. His head snapped toward the point of contact. The motion was sharp, mechanical, controlled, like a turret turning. The sudden movement was so shocking the entire plaza flinched as one. Daniel's eyes locked on Harlow's with a force that wasn't rage, but something colder, a glacial calm, the stillness of deep water moments before it erupts. The world narrowed to 2 points. Harlow's trembling pupils and the memory of Mason's laughter echoing in a place where laughter had died. The command voice, "Step back." The words dropped from Daniel's mouth like slabs of stone, not loud but heavy, vibrating the marble underfoot. The command voice of a tomb guard is trained for this exact scenario. Rarely heard, never ignored. Harlow froze. His showman's grin faltered for the first time. "Wah," he began. Daniel's left foot slammed down in a precise half-step forward, heel striking like a gavel. The rifle rose from shoulder port to full guard carry in a blur, the steel bayonet flashing like lightning as it rotated to horizontal position. "Step back now." The crowd gasped again, then went utterly silent. Cameras stopped clicking. Children stopped whispering. Even the cicadas in the distant trees seemed to hold their breath. The shattered masked Harlow stumbled back half a pace, instinctively. His grin was gone. His face drained of color, replaced by something raw and unmasked. Fear. "Hey, relax," he stammered, hands lifting. "I was just talking. You were interfering with the performance of duty," Daniel thundered, voice now booming across the plaza like a cannon blast. "Step back." The sound was surgical, no emotion, only precision. The trained cadence of command slicing through chaos. Harlow tripped on his own heel and fully retreated across the boundary rope. The security officer lunged in front of him, radio pressed to his mouth, eyes blazing. To Arlington supervisors in dark suits emerged from the colonnade like summoned ghosts, striding toward the plaza with grim faces. The rifles silenced. Daniel did not advance. Another inch. The rifle lowered back to port arms, exact and deliberate. His boots locked into parade stance. His eyes returned forward, as if nothing had happened, but everything had. The crowd erupted, not with cheers, not yet, but with a stunned wave of whispers. Some people cried quietly without knowing why. Others stood rooted, mouths open, as if the air itself had just thundered judgment on their souls. Harlow stood off to the side now, shaking visibly, color flooding back to his face in blotches. His showman mask tried to reform, but it wouldn't stick. The cameras that had once adored him now stared with cold disapproval, recording his collapse in 4K. The line restored to Arlington supervisors stopped at the plaza rope. One spoke briefly to security, then raised his voice to the crowd. "This plaza is an active ceremonial post," he said firmly. "Disturbances will not be tolerated. Please remain behind the boundary." Then, softer, to the Medal of Honor veteran on the bench, "Sir, thank you for your patience." The old soldier nodded faintly, tears in his eyes. Daniel didn't react to any of it. His pulse slowed, his breathing leveled, his world shrank back to the thin sacred line around the tomb. Stillness is strength, he reminded himself. Hold the line. The moment freezes time seemed to crystallize. The crowd, once a buzzing hive, now stood like figures in wax. Harlow was silent, crushed under the invisible weight of something he had never understood. And in the center of it all, Daniel stood rooted like a pillar, unshaken, unmoved, a living monument holding back the tide of chaos. One child's small voice finally broke the spell. He moved. Her father knelt, whispering. He did what he had to. The walk of shame security quietly approached Harlow. Their tone was polite, but final. They did not put hands on him. They did not need to. Harlow's steps faltered as he backed away, then turned. The same boots that had swaggered across the plaza now scuffed like the feet of a man leaving his own trial. Reporters aimed their lenses away from him, focusing instead on the unmoving guard framed perfectly by the sunlit marble. Harlow glanced back once, hoping for some fragment of control to cling to, and found none. Daniel never looked at him again. The crowd's breaths. Harlow disappeared beyond the columns. The plaza collectively exhaled for the first time in 10 minutes. It sounded like surf breaking on rocks. The little girl who had cried earlier whispered, "He's not a statue," her father nodded, voice rough. "No, he's a soldier." The Medal of Honor veteran rose to his feet with visible effort. He did not approach Daniel. He simply raised a trembling hand to his brow and saluted. Daniel's eyes didn't flicker, but somewhere behind the steel mask, something in him eased just a fraction. The sacred reset exactly 20 seconds after the incident ended. Daniel performed the slow, ceremonial weapon inspection, the same one done every 30 minutes by regulation. The movement was flawless, not a finger out of place. It was his silent way of declaring, "The line is restored. The duty continues." The crowd understood. They lowered their phones. Hats came off. Silence returned, not brittle now, but reverent. The plaza had become something else entirely, not a stage, but sacred ground again. In that silence, one truth pulsed like a heartbeat through every watching soul. Honor had spoken, and it had done so without raising its voice. A ringing silence swallowed the plaza. The sunglasses man stood trembling, his arrogance cracked like shattered glass underfoot. The guard's single word, "Stand down," still hung in the air, echoing off the marble like the toll of a solemn bell. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe. Then the Medal of Honor veteran straightened his back. It was subtle at first, as though he had pulled an invisible cord through his spine. The years seemed to peel from him like shedding weight. He released his cane, letting it clatter softly against the marble, and stood unaided, unwavering, eyes blazing. The faint sunlight caught on the pale blue ribbon at his chest. He took one deliberate step forward. The guard didn't move. He didn't need to. The space between them thrummed like a drawn bowstring. The arrogant man's voice cracked into the hush. This is ridiculous," he stammered, trying to summon his old swagger and failing. "He shoved me. Did you see that? Someone arrest him." No one answered. Instead, a ripple went through the watching crowd. Two men in dark suits detached from the edges, Secret Service detail, faces expressionless, hands near their earpiece. They strode forward with surgical calm. The arrogant man's sunglasses slipped from his nose as he stumbled back. "Sir," one of the agents said flatly, "you need to come with us." "What? Me? He's the one," the man began, pointing wildly at the guard. "Enough," the other agent said, voice like flint striking steel. "This is hallowed ground. You've disrupted an official watch at the tomb. That's a federal offense." Murmurs surged through the crowd, a mixture of relief, awe, and righteous fury finally finding its voice. Phones rose higher, flashes sparking. Someone whispered, "They're actually arresting him." The man's protests disintegrated into babble as the agents seized his arms. His knees buckled. They marched him away swiftly, efficiently, as if he were weightless. The crowd parted in absolute silence. The man's designer shoes scraped against the marble, leaving nothing behind, and just like that he was gone. The veteran stepped closer to the guard now, until they stood only feet apart. The guard lowered his rifle, clicked the butt softly against the marble, and came to full ceremonial attention. Then, as if the weight of the entire nation rested on that single gesture, he executed a flawless final salute. The veteran's hand trembled as he returned it, slow, deliberate, tears glinting in his clouded eyes. Two soldiers from a distant era acknowledging each other across the gulf of time. Cameras flashed. Someone audibly sobbed. A little boy on his father's shoulders whispered, "He's real." The veteran lowered his hand. The guard's salute dropped in perfect synchronicity, a mirrored motion like the closing of a sacred book. The guard then pivoted sharply back into position, facing forward once again, motionless, silent, unyielding. It was as though nothing had happened, as though chaos itself had tried to breach his post and shattered against it. The crowd stood stunned. Even the pigeons on the far balustrade seemed frozen in reverence. The veteran bent down, retrieved his fallen cane, and straightened with quiet dignity. He nodded once, a gesture that carried the weight of wars and decades, and turned to leave. As he passed the onlookers, they instinctively stepped back, forming an unspoken aisle. No one spoke, no one dared. Hands lowered phones and raised them to brows instead, offering silent salutes as he passed. The old man did not look left or right. He only placed one trembling hand over the medal at his chest and walked on, the echo of his steps lingering like faint drum beats long after he had vanished from sight. Behind him, the guard remained rooted in place, an eternal sentinel, eyes fixed ahead. The marble plaza once again returned to its sacred stillness, and somewhere, high above the plaza, the flag stirred in the wind and cracked like distant thunder. The moment had already gone viral. Live streams blaring across feeds, headlines igniting, but down on the plaza itself, there was only silence, and the immovable silhouette of a soldier who had chosen honor over protocol, and in doing so reminded the world what those words truly mean. The plaza had emptied by the time the shadows stretched long across the marble. Only a faint scattering of petals from the trimmed hedges remained on the wind, drifting over the stones like whispers of color. The ropes were gone. The murmuring crowd had dispersed, some lingering in clusters at the far gates, speaking in hushed tones as though unwilling to break the spell that had hung over the place. But the guard still stood, unmoved, unflinching. The echo of his salute lingered like a ghost, burned into the minds of all who had witnessed it. From the far edge of the plaza, boots approached in crisp, measured strides. The sound was soft but unmistakable authority wrapped in restraint. A tall man in a tailored service uniform emerged from the shadows. Silver eagle pins glimmered on his shoulders, a full bird colonel. He carried his cover tucked beneath one arm, and in the other hand, a folded sheet of parchment, the kind used for official commendations. He stopped several paces behind the guard. For a long moment, he simply stood there in silence, head slightly bowed. Then he placed the parchment gently on the low marble ledge, its white surface stark against the stone, and stepped back. The guard did not move. The colonel's eyes softened. He inhaled sharply, squaring his shoulders as if carrying invisible weight, and then he raised his hand in a slow, solemn salute. It was not the quick, crisp motion of routine duty. It was deliberate, reverent, heavy with meaning, the kind of salute offered at gravesides, at the edge of battlefields, at the end of long goodbyes. For a breathless instant, the world seemed to hold its breath again. Then the colonel lowered his hand, placed his cover back on his head, and walked away without a word. His boots clicked against the stone until the sound faded into the deepening dusk. Moments later, a small shape peeked from behind one of the granite columns near the visitor path. A boy no more than 7 with wide eyes and a toy flag clutched in one hand. His parents stood back a few feet, unsure whether to pull him away or let him be. The boy stepped closer, gaze locked on the immovable guard. He stood in awestruck silence for several seconds, then whispered to no one in particular, "He's a hero." The words were almost swallowed by the breeze, but they reached the guard. His jaw tightened just slightly, like a fault line deep beneath the surface. Then stillness reclaimed him. The boy's mother gently took his hand and led him away, looking back only once. When they were gone, the guard remained alone beneath the fading flag. His shift would end in less than an hour, but the discipline in his posture betrayed no hint of fatigue. Only when the last sliver of sun bled away did his eyes flicker. Just once toward the folded parchment the colonel had left. He would not break posture to read it yet. but he already knew what it said. Inside his chest pocket, hidden under his immaculate coat, was a worn dog tag. It had belonged to his closest friend, the one who never made it home, the one whose name was etched on the wall just beyond the plaza tonight. When his watch ended, he would walk there in silence. He would place the tag beneath that name and whisper, "We stood tall today," and then he would return to his quarters, fold his uniform with surgical care, and prepare to stand again tomorrow for them, for all of them, because tradition is not weakness. Stillness is strength, and some posts can never be abandoned. They called it a breach of protocol. We call it a reminder. In a world that moves too fast, where outrage burns bright and fades even faster, one man chose to stand still, not for applause, not for cameras, but because he had sworn an oath to guard the memory of those who gave everything, and to do it without ever bending. For a few fleeting minutes on that marble plaza, the world stopped with him. We saw arrogance crumble, we saw silence speak louder than shouting ever could, and we saw an old warrior, frail in body but unbreakable in spirit, stand tall again because another soldier gave him the respect he had earned. Decades ago, that guard didn't raise his voice. He didn't push back with force. He simply stood his ground and saluted. And in that single gesture, he reminded us of something we too often forget, that discipline is not coldness, that stillness is not weakness, that honor, even when quiet, can thunder across generations. The man who mocked the sacred was led away in disgrace. The veteran who carried a nation's scars walked off into the fading light, head high, and the guard, the silent sentinel, returned to his post, as if nothing had happened, because that's what duty looks like. It doesn't chase glory, it endures. If this moment moved you, don't let it fade into another passing headline. Tell someone, share it, keep their stories alive. Honor is a torch, and every time we pass it on, its light grows stronger. The world will forget what was said. It will forget who shouted the loudest, but it will remember the man who stood still and saluted.